Here's a sentence that makes people uncomfortable. Most retirees are not underfunded because they were unlucky. They are underfunded because they ran the default system. The default system turns raises into obligations, and it does it so gently that you call it progress. Let me show you how that produces predictable outcomes. When I say retire with $1 million, I mean the money sitting in retirement accounts you can actually draw from, 400 wonks IRAs and Roth IRAs. Still, I am not counting your house, your car, or anything illiquid. You can't reliably turn into groceries, property taxes, and health care. And yet retirement is paid in cash flows, not headlines. People love to point to home equity and say they are doing fine. But unless you sell, downsize, or borrow, that equity doesn't buy dinner. Some people do have businesses, rentals, or other assets. A surprising number of people don't. So I keep the comparison strict and simple. Keeping the focus on retirement accounts makes the comparison straightforward. It forces us to look at what can actually fund daily life when work stops. Still, here is the core statistic. Only about 3.2% of retired households in the United States have $1 million or more in retirement accounts. So that is roughly 3 out of every 100 households, not 3 out of 100 people. Households, if one spouse has $600,000 and the other has $400,000, that household reaches the milestone. If you are single, it is only your accounts. This information comes from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, but it is one of the most trusted sources on household wealth in the United States. The reason this matters is not bragging rights. It is what the statistic represents. It represents how rarely people accumulate enough liquid assets to buy time. Now compare that milestone with what is typical. The median retirement savings for all households across all ages is just $87,000. If the median is $87,000, then half of households have less than that. Half of the country is trying to fund a long retirement with an amount that can't carry the weight. $87,000 might sound like a reasonable starting point early in a career, but it is not a finish line, so it is not even a halfway point. What is even more concerning is that the numbers don't improve much as people age, time passes, but balances often don't catch up. Even households nearing retirement in their late 50s and early 60s only reach a median retirement balance of around $185,000. That means many people arrive at the edge of retirement holding a foundation, not a plan. They are physically close to stopping work, but financially far from safe. The 4% guideline is not a magic trick. It is simply a way to estimate what a portfolio can support over time with adjustments for inflation. By that guideline, $185,000 is about $8,000 in annual retirement income. When the base is small, the output is small. At that stage, there is very little runway left for compounding to make a meaningful difference. But the curve needs time, and time is the one input you can't buy back. So from there, the options narrow quickly. Many people work longer than planned. Others lean heavily on Social Security. Some cut expenses through downsizing just to make the math work. None of those choices feel like the retirement people pictured. They feel like managing scarcity. And something always goes wrong. Still, a car repair, a medical bill, home maintenance. Without a buffer, one surprise becomes the story of your next decade. You might assume becoming a millionaire should be easier than ever. Stocks climb, home prices climb, so incomes follow. So why is $1 million still uncommon? Because inflation can make it tougher to build wealth at the same time. It makes the numbers look bigger. Rent, housing, food, gas, and healthcare keep climbing. People hear themselves say life keeps getting more expensive, and they are not wrong. Even disciplined households struggle to invest consistently when the cost of living keeps applying pressure. The money has somewhere to go before you get to choose. Still, that is the paradox. It may be getting easier to reach $1 million invested and harder at the same exact time. So what kind of income does $1 million actually provide? Using the 4% withdrawal guideline, a $1 million portfolio can generate about $40,000 per year before taxes on its own. That might not sound like much, but retirement is not about impressing anyone. It is about removing fear. Let's put a security averaging around $24,000 per person annually. A retired single person could have about $64,000 per year. A couple can easily reach about $88,000 per year. That level of income is enough to cover the basics and create breathing room, but it gives you a foundation that feels stable instead of fragile. So how comfortable it feels depends on one big factor: housing. Housing costs have a huge impact at every stage of life, but especially in retirement. If your mortgage is paid off or you live somewhere with low housing expenses, that income stretches surprisingly far. Removing a large fixed payment is like giving yourself a permanent raise without heavy rent or a major mortgage burden, and with manageable costs for maintenance, insurance, and property taxes. Money goes farther than people expect. For context, the typical household spends almost $80,000 per year. The typical retired household spends about $60,000 per year. For many retirees, $1 million plus Social Security is not just enough. It provides a comfortable safety net. Small and medium expenses can be managed without derailing the plan. It is not extravagance. It is control. It is peace of mind. But when you are just starting out, growing a $1 million portfolio feels almost fictional. When your net worth is $5,000 or $20,000, the distance looks absurd. Saving $500 or even $1,000 a month can feel pointless. Still, at that stage, progress feels painfully slow. Early on, your contributions matter more than your returns, and yet the account balance moves in small, unimpressive increments. But this is where many people quit. Not because the math failed, because the psychology failed. Compounding doesn't show up early. It hides. A $50,000 portfolio growing at 10% only adds $5,000 in an average year. That doesn't change your identity, but a $500,000 portfolio at the same rate quietly adds $50,000 without you doing anything new. So the math did not change, but the base did. By the time you are nearing $1 million, market growth often contributes more each year than your annual savings. To some people, it feels sudden in hindsight, but it is not one lucky year. It is the accumulation of consistent contributions layered on top of time. The early years build momentum. The middle years feel repetitive and unexciting. The later years are where compounding finally becomes visible. The people who reach the milestone outlast doubt. Still, they survive boredom. They keep doing the simple thing when it is not entertaining. Now here is the part most people miss. The same forces that make compounding powerful are also the forces that keep most people out of the $1 million club. The barrier is not only income, it is the inability to consistently create and protect a gap between earning and spending, and yet wealth only grows in that gap. If there is no gap, there is nothing for compounding to work on. And the modern economy is very good at erasing gaps. It offers comfort first, then sells you dependence. But that is what I call the salary trap. But it is sophisticated because it feels like success. But let me put you inside a morning I have heard described many times. You wake up at 6 a.m., 7 minutes before your alarm. Your body knows it has been doing this for 4847 days, almost 13 years at the same company. You tell yourself it is security, a good salary. benefit stability. But as you stare at the ceiling, there is a feeling you can't quite shake. You are making more money than your parents ever dreamed of, and somehow you feel more broke than ever. That is not a coincidence. It is by design. This is the salary trap. Let me introduce you to Sarah. She is 34, makes $85,000 a year, and on People, she is in the top 20% of earners in her country. She should feel rich. She doesn't. Sarah gets paid every 2 weeks. Still, that is $216,000 before taxes. After taxes, it is $2,458. So now here is where the trap gets interesting, but the system doesn't present her with a clean choice. Still, it doesn't say, here is your money, decide what to do with it. Still, instead, it fragments her money across invisible channels before she ever sees it as hers. Rent takes $1,200. That is nearly half of her after-tax income. Groceries and dining out take $400. And yet car payment, insurance, and gas take $550 phone. Internet, subscriptions take $120. Utilities take, but by the time Sarah actually feels her payday, she has already spent $2,410 of her $2,458. She has $48 left for an entire 2 weeks. The psychological genius is that she doesn't experience it as deprivation. She has a car. She has a place to live. She looks successful. The system gives you just enough comfort to stop you from asking why you are not building wealth. This is the salary trap's first weapon, the illusion of prosperity through fragmentation. When money comes in a lump sum and leaves in small pieces, your brain never fully grasps that you are just treading water. Still, you have a lifestyle, not wealth. Now let's talk about what actually keeps you stuck. This is where it gets darker. The entire system is designed to keep you dependent on that paycheck. When you are dependent, you are predictable. When you are predictable, you can be controlled. And yet you need the job. You can't take risks. Still, you can't start a business. You can't invest in your own ideas. All your money is already promised to someone else. Still, your landlord, your bank, the car company, they all benefit when you are trapped. And yet you become a guaranteed revenue stream, but you don't actually benefit. You are told to get a good education. So you do. Still, maybe you go into debt for it. Now, you are hunting for a job to pay back that investment. You find one great salary, maybe $60. But the moment you accept that job, something happens. Your lifestyle automatically inflates to match your income. Still, economists call it lifestyle inflation, and yet I call it the system's second trap. You get the job at $60. And suddenly you can afford a nice apartment. So you get one still, you can afford a nice car, you get one, your payment goes from $200 to $400, marry you making $90,000. So you move to an even nicer place, $16 in rent, a better car, a $500 payment. Maybe you take a vacation you would not have taken before. So each increase in salary feels like freedom. But each one tightens the noose. You are no longer free to leave that job because you need that salary to maintain your lifestyle. This is what I call golden handcuffs. But the cruelest part is that you did it to yourself. Still, the system did not force you. It just presented the option, and human psychology did the rest. So we see progress as moving up, not as actually getting richer. So we move up into a lifestyle that consumes every penny we earn. The CEO making $500,000 a year can be just as trapped as someone making $50,000. If their lifestyle requires $450, the salary doesn't determine freedom. The gap between income and expenses does. And the system is designed to keep that gap as small as possible. Let me tell you about my friend David. He worked in tech, made 6 figures, and still felt stuck. Every time he thought about quitting, his stomach would drop. So he had already committed to a $400,000 house, 2 car payments, and kids in private school. One day his company offered him a promotion, a $20,000 raise. He felt relieved, grateful, like he had won. Then life happened, and yet his oldest needed braces, and yet he got a new car because the old one needed too many repairs. And just like that, his financial stress did not decrease. So it stayed exactly the same. This is the system's most insidious trick. So you are not building wealth with salary increases. You are increasing obligations faster than income grows. It is why the person making $30,000 and the person making $300,000 often report similar levels of financial stress. The system is engineered so required expenses always catch up. So I want you to imagine something. Imagine you quit your job tomorrow. You just left. How many months could you survive? Be honest. If your answer is less than 3 months, you are trapped, and you are not alone. Over 60% of professionals could not sustain their lifestyle for more than 1 month without a paycheck. Think about that, but 1 month away from a crisis at all times. That is security, but a very comfortable prison. The salary trap convinces you this is normal. But work, earn, still, spend, work harder. Earn more. Spend more. But this is not inevitable. It is not a law of physics. It is a choice that gets made in small steps. So the moment you realize your salary is not keeping you rich, it is keeping you busy enough to not become rich. Everything changes because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start asking different questions. Not how do I make more money, but why does all my money leave? Not how do I get a promotion, but how do I build assets instead of obligations? And yet now bring it back to retirement. The reason so few people retire with $1 million is not that the goal is impossible. It is that the salary trap steals the inputs that compounding requires: time, margin, and consistency. When the gap is $48 for 2 weeks, compounding has nothing to work with. When the gap is thin, every surprise becomes an emergency, and emergency thinking destroys long-term investing. That is why people panic when markets dip 20% or 30% in a single year. Without margin, volatility feels personal. So the households that reach $1 million built systems that could survive boredom and survive downturns. They kept contributing, especially when it was hard. Reaching 7 figures usually means you consistently saved $500 or $1,500 a month for years. It means resisting the temptation to buy expensive cars or designer clothes. It means continuing to invest even when the markets were crashing. It sometimes involves late nights tracking budgets, cutting back on dining out, negotiating raises, and working on side hustles to increase your income. It means watching your portfolio grow slowly while friends spent freely. It means staying the course instead of panicking when stocks dip 20% or 30% in a single year. Sometimes it means choosing not to spend 2 months of contributions on a weekend away, even when you wanted it. It is not that you never wanted to enjoy life. It is that you understood the trade. But short-term pleasure for long-term control. And yet hitting this milestone also requires self-reflection. You learn to delay gratification. You learn to ignore social pressure to keep up. Still, you define success for yourself instead of measuring it against everyone else. So some naysayers like to say $1 million is not significant anymore. I understand why they say it. Still, prices rise, and the same number feels smaller than it did decades ago. But significance is not only about purchasing power, and yet it is about stability. $1 million. Liquid retirement accounts is still the difference between choices and constraints. It is the difference between retiring because you are ready and retiring because your body refuses to keep going. The money doesn't create happiness. It creates room to breathe. And yet, when people reach retirement with small balances, they become fragile. A bad year in the market, a high medical bill, or a spike in housing costs can force decisions they never wanted to make. Fragility changes behavior. It makes people overly conservative when they should be patient, and overly reactive when they should be calm. So that is why I keep returning to systems. A system that produces fragility is not a good system. Even if it looks successful on the outside, many people look at $1 million and focus on what it can't buy. But I focus on what it prevents. It prevents panic. It prevents the constant fear of running out. It prevents the need to ask for permission to live your own life. It also prevents the temptation to make reckless moves. So when people feel cornered, they reach for miracle solutions. And yet miracle solutions rarely end well, and yet a strong retirement balance doesn't remove uncertainty. It simply gives you the capacity to handle uncertainty without collapsing your plan. That is why $1 million is still a big achievement. It usually means you did the boring things for years when nobody was watching. It means you kept investing through seasons that punished optimism. You learned that volatility is the price of admission, not a sign you are doing it wrong, and yet it means you did not confuse temporary market drops with permanent loss. Still, you kept contributing when it felt pointless. This is where the salary trap is especially destructive. The trap doesn't just steal money, it steals your ability to stay consistent. Consistency is what allows compounding to work. If you stop and start, you flatten the curve. You turn a long-term advantage into a short-term struggle. People underestimate how much the middle years matter. They are not exciting, but they are decisive. They are where the base becomes large enough for the math to show up later. If the middle years are spent upgrading obligations, the base never forms. Then the later years arrive, and the person wonders why the plan did not work. And yet it did work still. It produced exactly what the system was designed to produce, a life dependent on paychecks. But the truth is that most people are not failing at investing. They are failing at protecting the gap that makes investing possible. That is why my advice often sounds simple. So it is simple. But simple doesn't mean easy, because it fights your impulses and your environment. If you want a clear picture of your system, look at your calendar and your bank statements. Your system is not what you say you value. It is what you repeatedly fund. If most of your money funds obligations, your future will be obligation. If some of your money funds assets, your future gains optionality. This is also why cutting costs is not punishment. And yet it is reclaiming decision. Making power still, the goal is not to live small, but to live on purpose. But the salary trap makes spending feel automatic. A bill here, a payment there, a subscription you forgot about. The outflow becomes background noise. But background noise is exactly how you lose decades. You don't notice the leak until the tank is nearly empty. When you reach retirement, there is no overtime for your past. There is no extra shift that gives you back your 30s and 40s. So the only thing left is what you built. Still, that is why I say the $1 million goal is less about the number and more about the process. So the process builds habits that protect you from the salary trap. If you build those habits, the math has a chance. If you don't, the math never even gets invited to the room. So yes, $1 million is still a lot of money. And the fact that it is still rare tells you something. Still, it tells you the default system is not designed for wealth. The default system is designed for activity. Work, earn, spend, repeat. It keeps you busy and calls it stability. If you want a different outcome, you need a different structure. You need a structure that creates margin first, then lets compounding do what it always does over time. I am not asking you to be extreme. I am asking you to be deliberate. So deliberate beats dramatic when the game is decades long. And once you have a deliberate structure, you don't need constant motivation. You need consistency. And yet consistency is the real secret hiding in plain sight. And yet that is why only a tiny fraction reaches the milestone, not because they found a secret stock tip, because they built a system that refused to break when life got loud. Still now, if you want the mechanics, keep them simple. First, stop confusing income with wealth. And yet a $200,000 salary is income. $50,000 in savings and investments is wealth. One is temporary and depends on your labor. The other is permanent, and it can outlast it. Second, attack the gap, but intentionally keep your expenses lower than your income. But this feels backward, but it is the only mechanism that works. Not liabilities that work against you. But third, redirect that gap into assets that work for you. And yet, most importantly, build optionality. When you have 3 to 6 months of expenses in savings, something shifts psychologically, you are no longer trapped. You can negotiate better, you can take risks. You can leave situations that don't serve you. That buffer also protects your investing plan. It keeps you from selling at the wrong time just to pay bills. The reality is that $1 million is more than a number on a screen. It is the sum of hundreds of smart choices, small sacrifices, and disciplined habits that compound over several decades or more. And that is why only 3 out of 100 households actually have that saved by the time they retire. Freedom is rarely built in a single day of brilliant action. It is built through long-term discipline, repeated quietly, until the curve finally becomes visible. Time keeps moving either way. The curve rewards early margin, not late panic. Comfort can hide dependence. Ownership creates options. Start while time still helps.